Hi, good afternoon. You all look a lot more serious than you did first thing this morning, doing the drawings and everything. I hope you are prepared for some activity because we have got things for you to be doing, okay? You don't all have to share, but it would be great if some of you can share some of the things that you're working on today. We have got very, very packed schedule, so I'm going to have to very quickly tell you what it is that we're doing and introduce you to the core parts of this model. Now, what we're going to do is introduce you to the four phases of our blended learning design process, which is, you can see up here, preparation, input, application, and follow-up, which conveniently spells, anybody? Thank you very much. So this is the 1 minute version of the PIAF process. So when we're working on a blended learning design, we consider these four things. The first P, preparation, which is preparing the learner for the learning and preparing the learning for the learner. So making sure everything is prepared for each other, the two things are prepared to receive each other, to work together. Then we have input. This is often the most formal part of the program. This is the bit that would probably most be recognizable as training or formal courses. This is the bit where there is usually a transfer of knowledge and skills from someone who is acting as a trainer, designer, to the learner. Then we have application, which is probably the most important part of this. So this is actually real application in the workplace as part of the job wherever possible. If it's not possible, so if it's something that's dangerous or a situation doesn't yet exist, so it might be some kind of like an oil rig that hasn't yet been built, this might be done through some kind of quite sophisticated simulation, but it's all about actually applying what it is that you've learned. And then the part that takes up the longest is the follow-up. So this is, once the application has started, what are we going to put in place to make sure that the learner, as they're applying their learning, get support either from peers, from other online systems, from resources, reference materials, and so on. Now, what we're going to do with this process is we're going to go through this next step, the 3 L's, the learners, the learning, and the logistics, which you would probably recognise as the key things that you would be looking at when you're doing a typical sort of training needs analysis. So in just a moment, and Clive's been looking forward to this for ages now, I'm going to sit down here and Clive is going to interview me. I'm going to take the role of the client. The best bit is Clive's got no idea what I'm going to say. So I've brought with me a real client project that I've worked on. I've got my notes with me from that meeting, but Clive's got no idea what that project was. He's got no idea what came out of that meeting. He's got no idea what it is that needs to be designed. So he's then going to work through the 4 phases in the learning design process and produce the learning design. And we're going to do this with Clive will work on it, and we're going to ask you to work on it as well. And we'll go through each step one at a time. So we'll look at preparation. Clive can work on it, you can work on it. We'll get some ideas from Clive, we'll get some ideas from you, and then in my role as the client, I'll choose what it is that I'm going to accept from either you or Clive. And to be honest, you lot are looking like winners already.
There's a lot more of them.
There is, yes. Are you ready to make a start? Great. Okay.
Okay, first of all, this did seem like a good idea when we first conceived this session. I've got absolutely no idea what Barry's going to come up with, but I trust him. Do I?
Well, you did at one stage, so don't stitch you up.
So what I want to do, Barry, is to ask you some questions which will, I think, make it quite easy for both myself and everybody else here to come up with a sensible blended solution.
Okay.
And but without this information, we'd be sort of shooting in the dark, really. So, I mean, the first thing I must ask you is what goal this particular intervention you've got in mind is looking to achieve. So where's it coming from?
Well, we have an organisation which is a housing association, which wants to make use of social media, specifically Facebook and Twitter, for customer service.
Okay.
That's a very specific need.
What does that mean?
So we have a group of people who are, everyone in the organisation has a telephone number and an email address, and they want everyone in the organisation to have a Twitter account and a Facebook account, and for those two channels to become normal forms of communication.
Within the organisation?
Within the organisation and outside the organisation. So if you're sending out an email, as well as having your phone number and your email address in the footer, you'll have your Twitter handle and your Facebook address. And similarly, if you're sending out a letter in the post.
So the population is what type of people?
Anybody in the organisation that communicates with customers by phone and email.
Okay, the customer-facing people.
Oh, yeah, all customer-facing people.
Okay. Just let me get this clear, but the communication we're trying to influence is the communication they have with customers, not between themselves.
It's with, primarily with customers. It is about customer service.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, good. So what can you try and characterise what these people, you want them to actually be doing at the end of this intervention?
Yeah.
That they might not be doing now, for example.
There's two parts to it. One is, well, actually, there's three parts to it. One is the first thing they've got to do is they've all actually got to set up Facebook and Twitter accounts to use specifically for work. So these are, so that's a first practical step. They've got to do that. There's then a responsive element. So they've got to be able to react to customers who are communicating with them using Facebook and Twitter. There's also a desire that individual teams will start to use social media to communicate with customers. But this isn't big professional brand marketing stuff. This is, bin dates are changing, or there's a garage available to rent or something. Okay. Small scale stuff.
And why aren't they doing it already?
Well, partly because no one had the idea of doing it until fairly recently, but their customers are clearly demanding it. But also partly because they have started doing it in some parts of the organisation, but lots of people are just not really sure what they're supposed to be doing, and they're quite nervous about the whole thing.
All right, so let's try and be a bit more specific about, assuming that this is we do need some sort of learning to take place here, what the nature of that might be. So what absolutely must they know, do you think, to be able to meet this goal?
Well, some of these people are going to have to know, what is this? What is Twitter? What is Facebook? They need to know what the organisation's guidelines are using social media, which already exist.
Need to know them.
They don't need to know the guidelines. No, they need to know that the guidelines exist, and they need to know how to reference them.
Right.
And they need to know how to set up a Twitter and a Facebook account.
Yeah.
And they need to know who can provide help and support.
Okay, so they don't just need to know things; they need to know where to find stuff as well. Is that right? Yeah. Which is going to be things like the policy and that sort of stuff. Yeah. Are there any sort of big ideas, do you think, or key principles that they need to really buy into if this is going to be a success?
That social media is business as usual. So it's just another communication channel, the same as if someone turns up at the front desk or phones up or uses email. That it's normal. All
right. And any skills that might need to be honed or introduced that is going to make this possible, do you think?
Beyond the technical skills of actually being able to create an account and know where you click and where you type, it's really judgment. So they're all very experienced people when it comes to customer service and communication, but understand there's a difference between the fact that social media is public and their other communication is private.
Okay, so there's definitely an element of judgment. They mustn't go too far.
No, so, and that's what you think about data protection and things that you would share in an email that you wouldn't share on a Facebook post.
Okay, that's interesting. So tell me a bit more about the people who are our target population. Sort of, first of all, how much do you think they already know about social media? I mean, presumably a lot of them use social media.
Well, this isn't very helpful. Yeah. But some of them, huge social media users, really avid users. Some people have got no idea what it is. Okay. Or they might have heard of Facebook and Twitter, but
and they certainly wouldn't have had any sort of formal introduction to any of this.
No. It's also worth saying, so in terms of the sort of prior knowledge and skills they have got, they're recognised as being great at customer service, which is what this is about.
Yeah, okay. So how interested are they going to be in in their behaviour changing in this way?
Generally, people are positive about it.
Yeah.
Because they're a very customer-focused organisation. They can see the benefits of it.
Yeah.
But there is they're slightly tempered by the fact that they're not familiar with social media, not familiar with what they should be doing with it that's different to what they used to. So there's just a bit of nervousness.
Okay. So
generally positive.
Do you think there's any, would you say that goes as far as they might have some fears about this whole process, trepidation about it?
Yes. One would be is fear of embarrassing themselves.
Yeah.
The other is fear it's just going to create more work.
Okay.
Rather than be a useful tool.
Yeah. Okay. And hopes, do you think? Any ambitions for the process?
Yeah, I think the fact that they are recognised for delivering great customer service, their hope is this is going to help them continue to deliver great customer service.
Yeah. Okay. What sort of language skills do they have and computer skills?
They are all PC users. They don't have PCs, Blackberries, they're all basic IT literate. And as an organisation, when it comes to language skills, the language of the organisation is English, and the expectation is everything they will be doing would be in English. Okay.
All right, a few practical things. When's this got to happen by?
Well, it was supposed to happen about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Start as soon as possible, and ideally everyone be ready to go within 6 months. But the idea is that people can start as soon as we're able to get people ready. This isn't necessarily a big hit, everybody at the same time.
No. Okay. So time isn't the biggest issue, other than it's fairly urgent. Is there a budget available?
Yes, not very much. £15,000 to £20,000.
Okay. So anything we need to do has to be done within. Does that include any costs of, our costs, sort of thing? Yes.
Explain our costs.
Okay.
Yes,
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and they have access to what sort of technology?
So everybody's got PCs.
Yeah.
Lots of people have got organisation
smartphones and things.
Blackberries. They use virtual meetings, so that they're located in 3 main offices.
Yeah. So
actually, meeting using WebEx or something is quite normal. So they don't do virtual classrooms, but they used to.
So they used to.
Yeah, they're familiar with.
Okay,
that kind of thing.
So they are where? How many of them, and where are they?
There are 1,500 people.
Yeah.
They are in 3 offices.
Yeah.
Which are about sort of 100 miles between each office.
Okay.
Some people work from home or work from smaller local offices, but theoretically everybody has a desk at one of those 3 offices, and some people float between those offices as well.
Okay.
And some teams are split between offices.
Is there any sort of social network that binds them together at the moment? Any sort of internal social network they use?
That would be stretching.
An intranet?
Yes, they've got SharePoint.
Oh, okay. Okay, I think I've got enough information. Has anybody else got a question for Barry that they think I haven't asked that would be really helpful to understand this?
So should everybody have their own personal account on Facebook and Twitter? And so the idea is that everyone in the organisation will create an account specifically for work, so it won't be their personal account, but they will create one that's tied to their work email address, one on Twitter, one on Facebook.
Okay. A question from a woman over here.
Hey. Why the key driver has been the fact that the organisation has recognised that for a lot of its customers, actually Facebook and Twitter are the primary means of communication. They don't want to phone people, they don't want to use email, so they need to go where the customers are. So what difference will it make to the organisation if it's successful? One, I suppose it's around maintaining customer service standards, because they are very, very proud at the recognition they get for customer service, which in the housing association sector is not always a very easy thing to achieve. There's something about mitigating risk and managing reputation as well, because until they start engaging with their customers on social media, there's an awful lot of complaints on social media that are unanswered. So other changes that go beyond just using the social media. Yes, I mean, part of it is the fact that there is social media guidelines that already exist. which they're not supposed to memorise these things, but they need to know, where they reference them and to have some understanding before they make use of them. One thing they've been very clear about, though, is that when it comes to policy, most of it already exists. So they already have policies around how you interact with customers on the phone, how you interact with customers by email, and it's the same policy being applied to how they interact with customers using social media, but with a little bit more concern around privacy because it's obviously more open. But I think the question of change is what's important. Yeah. So it's not just a piece of technology. It's not this isn't an IT issue. Yeah. This is a change issue here. As I said, this is a real project, which actually, the project itself is actually done. And this one has been delivered, and it was. It's fair to say it took us 18 months to get from an initial conversation to getting to the point where I was taking this brief from them, and the guidelines and policy changed once a month during that period, and there was an awful lot of gathering feedback as things rolled out, and yes, so you definitely that had to be part of the programme. Well, there's a couple of bits of information that Clive hasn't questioned me about, and actually no one has questioned me about yet. Oh, okay, right. Sorry.
You have to be quite quick.
I was just going to ask you, how will you control your customer expectation of the 24/7 nature of social media, where there's almost an instantaneous response expected back, as opposed to something like email or telephone? Once it's there, they're expecting the response, and also in relation to how you support your staff when it becomes obvious that they can't respond out with hours, but it becomes a very instantaneous and 24/7 area of work.
It's a very good question. It leads me to answer in a bit more detail one of the questions that Clive, or one of the things that Clive hadn't asked about, which is sort of other things that are around to support this project. And part of that is that although there are social media guidelines for the organisation, every team is establishing its own social media policy. And in most cases, part of that is the hours on which they will be available. So they are making clear on the Facebook page and on Twitter accounts that this account is manned, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and sort of good practice like who's on the account that day. The only places where it goes beyond that seems to be the sales-orientated part of the organisation that seems to be keen to be available on Twitter and Facebook 24/7. But I think they're motivated purely by the sales and commission. Yeah, so from a customer point of view, that's one of the things they're managing by policy. So similar to if you go to, say, Virgin Trains, if you go to their Twitter account, you'll see it tells you what hours that they cover, and explicitly signing on and signing off. So saying, it's 5 p.m, it's Friday, we're signing off, we'll see you Monday, kind of thing.
Okay. I think we have to move on because we've got to get right through designing this thing, and so that then there can be many more questions, but thanks for contributing those questions. We have some papers we'd like to hand out, if that's okay, so that everybody could get one copy of these. This allow you to participate in the design process here. And on one side of it is just a record of the questions that I asked, just as a little handy reminder. But I'd like to, I think this is something which hopefully some of you would like to do with each other, so perhaps with either on your own or with somebody who's sitting near you. Probably at least two would be nice, if two people working together. So if you could find somebody next to you who you're prepared to do this with, that'd be great. There is a given to this. The given is that we're going to have 4 phases. So you can't influence that, I'm afraid. There are going to be 4 phases. The first one's going to be preparation, the second one input, the third one application, the fourth one follow-up. We're going to take them one at a time. And the first thing I want you to be thinking about is, you already perhaps got some ideas in your mind what sort of process you'd like to be going through, but thinking about what sort of preparation might be needed so that this population feels comfortable about this intervention that's coming, they feel prepared for it, and that you feel you're well prepared to work with them. So there's 2 aspects, this sort of alignment of the learner with the learning, if you like. So what I want you to think is, what sort of ideas might you have to get this preparation phase done? So if you have a few minutes thinking about that, I'm just going to have a little chat with Barry while we do that. So talk about this preparation phase. Remember, what we're trying to do is to get to a situation where the people that in this target population feel comfortable with engaging with this program. We know how to prepare for them as well, and get rid of any anxieties. From my thoughts are that I probably would want to do some sort of questionnaire, and that questionnaire I think should be private and online, because I'd want to find out in that questionnaire what people's experience was of social media, but also what sort of attitudes and anxieties they had about it, so some open questions in there as well. So I'd like to do that. I'd also like to do some sort of top-down communication, which, because this is after all, a company program, and I'd want something, probably a video or something like that, which, where the rationale behind this program was clearly spelt out in an engaging way and in a way that was relevant to the people themselves, so they felt that there was something in it for them and not just something for the business. So those are a couple of things I definitely would do. I probably would expect the managers of these people in their departments to talk to their staff too, and to perhaps discuss any concerns they might have about it. So a lot of this is about exchanging information. It's also getting people motivated about this project, but also relieving any anxieties. So what I'm interested to know is, apart from those sort of things, has anybody got something very different in their design which they think that they'd like to contribute into the pot for Barry to consider? Okay, if you could wait for the microphone, you're going to really have to run around with that microphone. Okay.
Something from the customer itself, themselves, to say why do they want to focus on social media? Yeah,
great idea. So they could have, they could actually go out and talk to some customers, maybe get some little, video clips of customers, or if nothing else, some textual comments. Great idea. Yeah, I think we'll definitely have that, Barry. There's a lady in the orange over on the right here. Thanks, Annie.
I think I'd want to be able to give somebody a place to go to get more information or to register any anxiety. So where do I go to get questions? Where do I go if I've got any concerns about this?
Yeah, I like that too. I think it's definitely going to be necessary to have a go-to person, not just your manager, but perhaps the person who's more responsible for the policy. The actual information, this is going to come back. Obviously, we're going to have a place for information. And I presume that's going to be on the internet. How's that sounding, Barry?
Good, and very much like what we did.
All right, well, okay. Let's move on to the app. All right, just one very quick one.
It was just, some examples, other companies that are doing it. So you could go on and have a look and see what exists out there.
So we could communicate that again, and probably there's some sort of intranet sub-site here which is going to have this information, the videos, the quotations from the customers and so on. And absolutely right. Good stuff. Because I think this is all going to make people feel, it's going to relax them about the whole process. They understand why it's being done. They understand what's in it for them. And hopefully ready to go. Okay, so let's imagine that we want to have to provide some input now, because we want to actually be making some progress towards these learning objectives. Just to recap what Barry was saying, there were things like there's not a huge amount of knowledge to be gained, but there is a little bit of knowledge about how to use some of this software. It's probably not very complicated. They need to know that the policy exists. They don't need to know what's in the policy in great detail, because they can refer to that. They need some, perhaps some skills, I think, to probably make good judgments about those sort of interesting conversations they're going to get into with customers, and what's okay and what's not okay, what's going too far, what might damage the reputation of the company. And there are some big ideas to get across. The big ideas are really about the importance of social media, probably in how we communicate in the modern world, why this is going to be important in the future, which is something that some of these people may not have bought into. They may feel quite resistant to that. They may be one of these people, you're never going to get me on Facebook and all that sort of stuff. There presumably are still a few of those people. So let's think about what we might do. Now, typically in the past, we might have run a course here, so we don't have to do that. Let's just think of some things we think which will get these people through to that next point, because in the application phase we want to get them doing this stuff, with support. So a few ideas about input now. So have a little chat with your colleagues and let me have a little think what I might contribute. Obviously we've got to rush this through, but I think we've got time to do a reasonable job here. There's a few things going through my head and probably going through your head. And one of them is about the type, there's quite a bundle of different types of learning here and they need to be treated differently. And that's one of the aspects of, I think, a blended approach, which is quite interesting, is that you can run different streams of different types of learning objectives in parallel as you're working towards the overall goal of shifting performance. One of the things I'd like to just explore with you is some different strategies for learning. Is it possible you could show us a little video on that, Barry? I know it is possible, because when I'm thinking about different strategies for different types of objectives, I have a particular model in mind, and I'd quite like to share that with you, if that's okay.
This is Stephanie. She's watching a recording of a medical lecture delivered by a top consultant. It updates her on some key developments in her field of practice. She's not too impressed by the way the lecture is being delivered in a monotone drone, but she's keen to stick with it because the lecture is revealing some research findings that are highly relevant to her work. She's sitting with a junior colleague who is complaining that it's all going right over her head, but Stephanie doesn't have any such problem. She's an old hand and knows what she's talking about. And here is Stuart. He's being taught how to operate a brand new, latest technology forklift truck. Some of his mates who've been operating these things for years reckon they could work it out easily enough on their own. But Stuart's still a newbie, and he needs all the help he can get. Jason, the instructor, is very methodical. He has set some very specific objectives for the session and has demonstrated every aspect of the job really clearly. He watches while Stuart gives it a go and offers some useful feedback. Jason's not going to finish until he's sure that Stuart's got the hang of it and isn't going to do any damage to himself or the goods in the warehouse. Amy is meeting with her coach, Brendan. Brendan specialises in working with executives like Amy to prepare them for interviews with the media. He's helped Amy to clarify what skills she would like to improve in her media interviews, and now they're going to give it a go in an all-too-realistic role play. Afterwards, Brendan will help Amy to reflect on what she did well and what still needs to be improved. He'll keep working with Amy until she's confident she can do a good job. And finally, here's Asif. He's finished a course on negotiation skills and is trying hard to put what he has learned into practice. He has been watching some videos presented by expert negotiators and has got some important new ideas. He'll share those with his colleagues in their community of practice, along with a posting that he's written himself, reflecting on a particularly successful negotiation in which he managed to do just about everything according to the book. His trainer, Miriam, takes an active interest and occasionally shares new books, videos and articles that she's managed to track down. Everyone is looking out for each other as they continue on their learning journey. Stephanie, Stuart, Amy and Asif each experienced a very different strategy for learning. In Stephanie's case, this was exposition, the delivery of information by subject experts to their students. For Stuart, this was instruction. Jason instructed Stuart in how to operate the new forklift truck, following a structured process that works really well for delivering core knowledge and routine skills. In Amy's case, she was a participant in an exercise of guided discovery. Her coach, Brendan, set up activities from which Amy could gain insights and facilitated that process as best he could. In the last case, Asif was involved in a process of exploration, drawing upon resources provided by his colleagues and by his trainer Miriam, who functioned as a sort of curator. None of these strategies works for all types of learning and all types of learner. They all have their place, often in combination within a blend.
So what we're saying is, yes, so there's a number of different strategies we could use for different types of learning objective. And I think what was going through my mind, I don't know what you were thinking, that we need to use a number of different techniques here. Some of this information can just be presented. I mean, they can just read the policy. We don't need to dress that up and make complex materials about that. But I think that, and some of it we could say is there's an element of instruction, in other words, learning how to use these particular packages. I think to learn how to use the packages is really quite straightforward stuff, and I don't think making anything too complicated out of this is necessary. But I think certainly I would do, little software demonstration videos to show how to use all the aspects of these different packages. Probably, I don't know whether it's even worth assessing it. I think probably not. The thing that I'm most concerned about is the judgments and the fact that they need to be able to use these products intelligently, and that's something which is, I think, best approached through guided discovery. In other words, when we're looking at the sort of principles upon which you operate in your job, not when you're just following rules, but when you're making judgments in highly variable situations, then I think that those principles you have to discover for yourself. But if you like, you can put people into situations in which those insights can emerge. So my favourite idea at the moment, and I'd be interested to see if you can come up with something better, is that I would probably want to have some, because they're in 3 centres, and there's large numbers of these people in each centre, I don't see any obstacle for having some local sort of workshop type sessions, quite short sessions, maybe just an hour or so, which would be face-to-face. I can't see any barrier towards doing that. But what I'd like to see them doing in that session is looking at some of these scenarios, starting with fairly straightforward ones, and then looking at the more borderline difficult scenarios. So these can be interactive scenarios that produced, if you like, as learning technology pieces, but gone through as a group. So they do a number of these together and they discuss them and they come to their own sort of conclusions in terms of the key principles. But then ideally, because everybody's still going to be at a different stage at the end of that, they can go away and there'll be a library of further scenarios that people could look at individually and until they felt really confident they know what to do in each situation. So it's a bit of a hybrid of certainly scenario-based, case study-based work, but done initially in a group, and gradually as people want to just hone their skills and become more confident that they're going to make good decisions, they can continue to practice on their own. So that sort of crosses over a little bit into application. So those are the things that are occurring to me. Okay, and so there must definitely have been lots of very different alternatives to that we're thinking about here. So anybody like to contribute? So there's a gentleman here, if we could get a microphone to him.
We thought there'd be a lot of value in people, the learners, working together as a community, using Facebook and LinkedIn to actually compare experiences and support each other in their learning, as well as discussing the scenarios. Well, we came up with that too, by the way.
So what you're saying is to essentially use which I suppose it makes a lot of sense, is to use social media as the tool for the intervention itself. So okay, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely hadn't occurred to me, but I'm sure Barry would want to include that. There's a lady just on second row.
Hello.
Hi.
I was just thinking about having some kind of sandbox, some safe place that they could start to explore. So rather than go sort of live on the main Facebook account, so people who were new to it and were feeling a little bit reluctant to use the technology, they could explore in that safe place and again use the scenarios and some role play as a group.
Absolutely, and of course a lot of these ideas are beginning to cross over into application because they're all about building confidence, safe practice, gradually taking away the scaffolding until people feel more confident. Anybody else got, there's a woman about 5 rows back.
I thought about using some of the super users within the community who are more familiar with the technology and also comfortable using it. They'd have to be coached within your preparation stage to make sure they were modelling the right behaviours, but to use them as live on-site bodies for those who are more reluctant. Yeah,
because there is a sort of technical knowledge angle of this, isn't there, which is, so some people are certainly going to have more of that than others, and they can provide coaching support to others. I think that's definitely, I think we'll carry that over definitely into the application phase and the follow-up phase as well. Okay, maybe just one more if there is one. No? Okay. Are you comfortable with that, Barry?
I am, very.
Okay, so I want to move on now to, okay, we've provided some input and we now want people to be, you know, building confidence in more real-world situations that they can apply this, what they've been learning. So give a little bit of thought now to application and what you might put in, what you might put in place to help people to make that transition, transfer that learning into real practice. Okay? We're moving into application. We want to see transfer of learning happen here. We want to see evidence of that. We want to see people feeling confident and competent, and certainly far more than we would see in a normal training situation where so much dissipates so quickly after the intervention. So we want to see this absolutely happen. One of the things that has been going through my mind, and again I'm sure through yours, is who you're learning with at different phases. And I think that this is particularly important for this particular intervention. So I'd like to just show you another little video, just thinking about different social contexts in which you learn, and let's just see whether we've got those in balance across these different phases.
Meet Jacqueline. She's taking a rare moment out from her very hectic lifestyle and got to thinking. It's a long time since she was at school, but she seems to be a more active learner than ever. At the office where she works, she's currently part of an action learning set, a group of people like herself looking to tackle some of the obstacles to women progressing in management. With the aid of a facilitator, they're looking not just to address a very real issue, but to learn about the process of problem solving. They meet once every 2 weeks to discuss how the project is progressing and to adjust their plans. That's just at work. At home, she's on a crash course to brush up her Italian before she goes on holiday to Rome in a month's time. She's doing an online self-study course, which allows her to fit in lessons as and when she's able. She's also having weekly golf lessons with the pro at her local club. Her husband's a keen golfer, and she's looking to build her own skills so they can enjoy playing together. By coincidence, the golf pro is also off to Italy this summer, so they practice their language skills at the same time. For many years, Jacqueline has been a keen amateur filmmaker, a passion she developed at college. She tries to develop her talents through her active involvement in an online group of hundreds of other filmmakers like herself from around the world. The pressure's on because she's committed to sharing a short film she plans to make when she's in Rome. In for a penny, might as well go in for the whole euro. Although she probably doesn't realise it, Jacqueline is a participant in all of the 4 possible social contexts of learning. For her Italian lessons, she is learning alone. Her golf lessons are one-to-one. Her action learning allows her to interact with a group of learners, and her filmmaking group allows her to learn as part of a wider community. Each social context has its place depending on what it is you're learning, the amount of support you require, and what's practical. In a blended solution, you'll often see several of these used in combination, and sometimes all 4.
Okay, so that's one of the things that's going through my mind in this particular intervention is what sort of things could you do, you know, is it okay to do on your own? And we've seen some examples of maybe you're going to do some reading on your own, watching videos, you do a questionnaire on your own, maybe you do some of the interactive scenarios on your own. There's a sort of small local group, which is a bit like a sort of cohort of people you're working with together. We've talked about having a group session a little bit earlier and going through scenarios. We've talked about having a wider community of all the 1,500 people who are sharing their experiences as they go through on this journey. And we've begun to hint at some one-to-one support as well. We said, for example, earlier on, I think that the woman in orange suggested that we have a person you can call if you need help. We've also talked about super users who can come and help you if necessary. So I think we are crossing all 4 of those. And as we sort of cross almost seamlessly into sort of application and follow-up, there's no clear boundary here. I think what we're beginning to see is a different emphasis amongst those. This is just my own particular view. So I think that once people start now engaging, putting this policy into practice and doing this for good, those super users are going to be important coaches. So that one-to-one support is going to be very necessary. I still think in the local group there is an advantage in the local managers doing debriefings, seeing how people are getting on. Perhaps if they have regular staff meetings, they'd continue to do that. But also this bigger community is quite an important aspect of this too, because people are going to have experiences which are perhaps a bit unexpected, things which successes, things that they had difficulties with, and to be able to share those with everybody in the community is going to be really important. So I think that this application phase, there's also is going to be a question of just seeing that process play through, and it'll go into follow-up as well. But there will also have to be some monitoring. People are obviously going to have to watch these accounts, see what's progressing, give people some feedback if they feel that they're not using following the policy properly, or if not using taking the best advantage of the systems. So I'm not saying that's some sort of big heavy supervision thing, but just a check and balance, because people may not be knowing that they're doing something which perhaps they could do a little bit better. So, some sort of moderation of the process. So let's see what other types of application ideas anybody else has come up with to add into the mix. Anybody got anything else?
Yeah, we just thought taking the idea of branch scenarios a little bit further, and actually when they're practicing in a safe community before, say, the Facebook page is live to the public, you could sort of do wargaming and give them increasingly difficult things to handle. So an easy question, hard question, annoyed person, that type of stuff.
Yeah, it's probably a sort of personally, I would have put that in the input phase, but but it doesn't really matter. These things cross over. What you're saying, I think, is an element of sort of gamification in there, isn't it? Really giving it some a little bit more engagement, a little bit more I don't know, up the tempo a little bit, so people feel that this is a really fun thing to engage with, and they can gradually see themselves moving up through the levels. Yeah, I think that's
matched to their confidence and ability.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I mean, anything which is sort of combining storytelling with, really engaging challenges is definitely going to keep people's attention. Okay, and at the front here, the guy at the front.
To actually creating a real life scenario, maybe someone sending them a discussion on Twitter, and they have to actually follow that person, they have to respond, and they can do the same for Facebook too. So actually using the technology, so there can be a discussion on Facebook which they have to respond to. And
so it's a bit like a sort of role play type. I think that's a really good idea. That could, in early stages of application, is actually, set up some discussions which they have to respond to, which are perhaps, convincing and realistic chances to practice. Yeah, one more?
Just introduce the idea of how they're going to assess themselves later on, so get an idea of what kind of metrics they'll collect as they start to interact with people. Yeah, I think that is really important. I must admit, I was beginning to feel a bit uncomfortable when I started talking about the supervision of this thing, but it'd be much better if there were some metrics that they could monitor for themselves. Yeah, I think it's well worth looking for that. Otherwise, it's not really in the spirit of the whole thing, is it? Okay, let's just think finally about follow-up. And what we're talking about follow-up is like saying, look, this is no longer an intervention. This is real life. This is just business as usual. How do we support people to still continue to meet this goal that the organisation has on an ongoing basis? So this goes on into the future. So what extra things would we add into the mix? Or are there some things that we've already talked about that we'd start to emphasise here? So just a couple of minutes thinking about that, and then we'll be able to debrief the whole thing. Harry, I think by and large, from my point of view, I'd be interested to see what you come up with. I think the ingredients for the follow-up phase are probably already there. I'm looking for, the super users again, your go-to people. You've got a really, really good body of reference information on your intranet probably, or what other site they've got internally, but also encouraging people to be contributing to that, so that's growing as a resource. So, we're getting a bottom-up contribution to the performance support system, if you want to call it that, and the various measurement, the metrics in place so people can monitor what they're doing. I think keeping this going as a community for as long as it has life is important, so that until this becomes completely and utterly normal practice, it's useful, I think, to try and keep this community going. So people are sharing experiences.
People are problem solving with each other, saying, how would you have dealt with this situation? I had a really difficult one today. And after a while, I'm sure that will gradually dissipate and people will move on. But I think some of this can stay in place. So anybody got an additional idea for the follow-up? There's the woman in orange again, and we'll see if we can get round to get a few of you in.
Just following on from the community idea, with it being social, is there an opportunity to put some kind of league tabling in, so the top tweeters or top tweets of the week or the month, or that kind of thing? That sounds good. I definitely like that. So a little bit of the gamification thing again. There's several in the middle here, so we can take these very quickly if that's okay.
Some sort of a continual loop, not just to focus on the skills that the employees have learned, but also how the employees have contributed to change in the business process? Yeah, absolutely. So it's a sort of pat on the back and saying, look, this is what we've achieved. Let's hear some success stories and let's celebrate success. Yeah.
I think a good way is to of really sort of tying up your learning is teach others, so that if they've now sort of applied it and they now think that they now know a bit about it, and they could then teach others coming into the business.
So as new people come in.
Sort of
So that's a really nice idea too. I wish we had all of you here every time we were designing something. It'd be great.
I wish I bought a project I hadn't finished designing.
Yes.
This one.
I think it's also looking at the customer metrics as well.
Yeah.
So seeing how the speeds of answering their queries has improved. Those are the things to build morale.
Yeah, and after all, this was started with a business goal. So reflecting back to that business goal, when that business goal has been achieved, we can say that we've been successful. Okay, was there anybody else? Okay, yeah, come please.
You've got the potential for benchmarking with your competitors here.
Yeah.
So you could plug into things like cloud, so you get how meaningful you think it is, but you get some kind of numbers to compare.
Absolutely. Thanks.
The budget for the project was
15,000.
15 to 20,000. Yeah.
Would this cover it? Well, I don't know.
I think it would, because I think
the scenarios would have been
a lot of. There's been some fabulous ideas here. There's lots of things that I'm thinking, why didn't I think of that? Particularly using Facebook to get them to communicate with each other about Facebook. I'm sure there must have been a reason that I didn't do that. But most of these ideas, in some way, shape or form, things like having a sort of central hub of information, some videos, some scenarios, we were able to do within budget, because there was one question that I have already pointed out to Clive. There was one question that he didn't ask, which was what other help was there? And one was that we had access to the internal communications and marketing team. So we were actually able to get loads of stuff built at no cost. So the only thing that actually really cost was my time. And then with the sort of 500 quid we had left, we built some scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you take a very narrow definition of budget and just look at fixed costs, actual money expended, then fine. But I think if you looked at the indirect costs, it was obviously much more significant than £15,000. Yeah. It would be. Look, what we've done this afternoon is a bit different. We've taken I think it could be one of any number of different types of requirement that might come up in a business. This one did look like we could do something in terms of a learning solution. I think there were many times when somebody will come to you with a requirement. You say, well, actually, a blended solution, something with any sort of formal element isn't really what's needed. There are things that you can do without setting up an intervention like this. I think this. I was desperately hoping that Barry wouldn't give me one of those. Otherwise, we would have had a very empty hour. But I think that actually we were able to come up with some ideas which would make a reasonable contribution to meeting this goal. I think that your ideas added enormously to the ones that I conceived of. So thank you very much for that. But I do think that what I wanted to show was two things really. One is by obviously getting the right information at the beginning so you know what you're dealing with, and that's why I've given you a list of questions that I use. Obviously, I'm not saying that's the definitive list. You can add your own questions to it, and there were some very good ones added, but I hope that helps. That once you get the right information, that actually design doesn't become too tortuous a process. Actually, the design often sort of falls out of the answers you have to the questions, but often we don't ask the right questions and we find ourselves getting a very narrow definition of the problem. I think in particular here it's important that we didn't just see this as a learning about the policy type thing or a learning about how to use Twitter type thing, which are all quite trivial things. The real issues here were about changing people's behaviours, I suppose, not forcing them to change their behaviours, but encouraging them to change their behaviours and to embrace something that otherwise they may not have done, and feel really good about the whole process. And that required, I think, a lot more elements to it. The fact that we knew people might be a little anxious about the whole process meant we had to put quite a lot of support in. We used all of those social contexts. We used do some things you can work through on your own, some things you do one-to-one, things in a sort of smaller cohort, embracing the wider community. That all seemed quite natural. We used a number of different strategies. The scenarios and things like that were very much guided discovery. There were some little bits of elements of instruction, some things which were just read this, watch that, but also lots of genuine peer-to-peer exploration and sharing as well. So if you like, throughout the blend, we moved freely between a number of different strategies, a number of different social contexts. And I don't think, it wasn't feeling forced to me. I don't know about you, but I mean, I didn't feel we were just collecting things to throw into the pot. It did feel like these were contributing something. I think we would have to go back and say, look, do we need all these things or can we rationalize it? But the good thing about a blended design, I think, is that it is always a work in progress. Which is very rarely the case with an e-learning program, which tends to be, we make it, we put it out there, and then that's the end of it. We all walk away from it. I think this is very much a work in progress. In other words, you're constantly got the feelers out for what needs to be changed. You're constantly looking for ideas from your target population for things that need to be tweaked to improve the blend, until gradually it is a sort of process of successive approximation, getting closer and closer to what is going to be a really great program. And that's it, I think, Barry. So, are you now regretting you didn't have this session 2 years ago or whenever it was?
Yes, I'm definitely regretting that I didn't bring a project that was currently in progress rather than one that had already finished.
Yeah.
I think that for me the most interesting things that came out of this was the biggest challenge we had was not really any of the content. The content stuff, introducing Twitter and Facebook is quite easy. It was just that one little line that said it's got to be like business as usual. And if we'd rushed into, we'll make it a course, it suddenly stops being in any way usual or normal. All of the solutions that you were coming up with the exception of little bits like scenarios, which we did put in for practice, pretty much everything you did was in the flow of the work. It wasn't separate from the work. It was all around work. It was looking, how do we get people who are already using the tools to train others? How do we get them to use the actual accounts to connect with each other? How do we use an intranet site to share guidelines and things? It was all, very little of it actually looked like learning content. It looked more like typical, organisational communication. And I think what it certainly didn't look like, and bear in mind we were talking about blended learning, this didn't look like, here's a piece of e-learning, here's a course, here's a quiz. And that's the important thing about blended learning, has got so many different possible elements in it, and very few of them really look like training. So,
do we have any time for any final questions, or are we past time?
One or two very quick ones. Just squeeze away. We're a little bit over, but we've got a couple of minutes if there are some burning questions that you would like to ask. Oh, yes, look, wow.
Okay.
Just a quick one. Did you consider using another platform such as Zendesk to combine Twitter and Facebook? Instead of just having to use Twitter and Facebook directly with the customers, did you consider using another platform that would integrate with them?
Yes. The organisation was using Hootsuite and a couple of other things, but from that sort of professional marketing side of things. But for individuals, the idea was to just keep everything simple and just get people using the plain vanilla tools. I think there was a cost issue as well, potentially.
Anybody else?
That's it.
Excellent. I think we're done.
Beaten them into
I survived.